Hello, everyone. I'm Ross Monahan, and on behalf of the entire IABC Asia Pacific Board, including our new chair, Christy. Christy, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, Disconnect to Reconnect, how to control your technology so it doesn't control you. Our presenter today is Mel Kettle, who'll be well known to many of you. So IABC Asia Pacific is a regional board of IABC with 14 chapters in 8 countries in the region, along with members at large in Singapore, Pakistan, China, Fiji and Thailand. And we run a range of webinars, online networking events, and professional development activities as well. So this webinar is free, of course, to both members and non-members. That we provide many of these types of resources to the community free really speaks to what IABC Asia Pacific is all about, I think. We support our community of business communication professionals with innovative thinking, shared best practice, in-depth learning and career guidance. If you like our free resources, you will really love the resources available to IABC members. So please consider becoming a member. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I first approached IABC way back in 1985 when I was a student, and it was probably one of the best career decisions I have ever made. If you'd like to find out more about IABC Asia Pacific, if you're not a member, if you'd like to join up, just visit www.iabcapac, that's iabcapac.com. Now, before I hand over to Mel, I'd like to also welcome Matt McGain from Sketch Group. Hi, Matt, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Ross. How are you going?
Great. Matt is one of our wonderful IABC Asia Pacific partners, and he'll be creating some visual notes of today's webinar, as he has done in many of our IABC Victoria events face-to-face. So at the end, we'll be able to see some of Matt's creation throughout today's session, and we'll have a look at his colourful creation at the end of the webinar, and we might have a bit of a chat about that. And it will also be available on the IABC Asia Pacific website, as well as a great memento and reminder of some of the tips Mel is going to give us.
Yes, apologies that we're not able to have that streaming while Mel's chatting, but we're checking in occasionally through the session because the technology gods are not being kind to us today.
Yeah, that's something I think we're all pretty familiar with during these times of COVID quarantine. So over to Mel. Mel, just as many of you will know, is an expert at communication that builds trust. She's an outstanding communicator. She really understands how to create strategies that have immediate, meaningful impact. And I like this quote from Mel. She says, like baking a cake, it's essential to have the right ingredients to communicate with clarity, compassion and consistency. Although maybe in times of quarantine, maybe sourdough is probably, baking your sourdough bread is probably more appropriate. I'm seeing lots of those recipes at the moment. Now, if you have any questions for Mel in this webinar, you can just include them in the chat session. We will get to most of them after the session. As I said, we'll also be talking with Matt at the end as well. So over to you. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks so much, Ross, and thank you to Matt and to all of you for turning out this afternoon. As Ross said, and as I've popped into the chat box, I love a chat box in a webinar, particularly because I can't see you and I can't hear you. So please pop your, I don't know why, hang on. Ross, can you put me as the spotlight and not Matt?
Yes, I have. Done now.
Thanks. I'm not sure why. I've totally lost my train of thought there. sort of indicative of the tech dramas that we've had, that my brain will stop working for 30 seconds as well. As Ross said, we talked about cake. I don't make sourdough because we have the best bakery in Brisbane within walking distance, flour and chocolate. Anybody in Brisbane? And I've made too many cakes, as my genes attested to when I put them on half an hour ago. They're a bit tight. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been baking to cope with COVID. But what we're talking about today is, how do we disconnect to reconnect? And what do I mean by that? And what do I mean by connection? Well, as communicators, we all want to connect. We all want our communication to create real connections and sustained engagement. And so one of the things that I've noticed is a really big challenge for all of us, particularly at the moment, is how do we do that? But even just with the way that our lives are so entwined with technology at the moment, how do we, what do we choose when we communicate with people? How do we know what channels we need to be using? Do we use Facebook? Do we use Instagram? Do we have a meeting? Do we have a phone call? When do we use Zoom? When, God forbid, do we use TikTok or something else that's new and up and coming, that as more experienced and older communicators we might not be as familiar with as some of our younger counterparts, or as our children and our nieces and nephews and the younger people in our lives. So yes, I also do wonder how many of us are on TikTok. I do have an account, but I've not used it. But I do know there are some people using it amazingly well to generate business and awareness of who they are and what they do. But what we're here to talk about today is, why is connection important? So we know that when we're connected, people want to do things for us. We have longer relationships. We have stronger relationships. From a workplace perspective, when we have connection with our staff and with our customers, then they're much more likely to buy from us, to volunteer with us, to donate to us, to become members if we're a member-based organisation like IABC. So we're going to have a chat about all of those things. I'm just going to share my slides briefly. Okay, let's see. We've had a few rehearsals of this. Let's hope that it shows what it needs to. Okay, can I get the thumbs up, Ross, that you can see the one slide and not? Great, thank you very much. Gotta love a rehearsal when it doesn't quite work. So, human connection is the most important part of life. If we don't have connection, then our souls wither and die. Humans are designed to be beings that connect with each other. There's no, anybody who's had a child and has had that child immediately after birth placed on their skin to skin, whether it's a mother or a father, will know that immediate bond that you feel with your child. And that sort of sets the scene for the connection that we need for the rest of our lives. As I've already mentioned, when people feel connected to you, they're going to be more willing to do things for you. And that might be something as simple as doing their job or getting someone else to wash up when you've cooked. I find that today in our society, we're also phenomenally busy. We're busy with work, we're busy with life, we're busy watching Netflix, we're busy on social media, we're busy with all of our sporting events, with our kids, with our partners, with our friends, with everybody who has some impact in our world, that we often forget that, you know, we need to just strengthen the relationships that we have and think about what is it that we can do better to not just become more connected with other people, but it's really important that we're also connected to ourselves. One of my favourite quotes is from Maya Angelou, and she says, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And this includes you. How do you make yourself feel? So we need to remember that connection starts with you. And then once you've got a strong connection to yourself, and by that I mean you know yourself, you love yourself, you trust yourself, I'm not going to get too woo-woo on you, I promise, then you can give yourself properly to your family and your colleagues and your staff and your customers at work. Because if you can't lead yourself and look after yourself and feel a genuine connection with you and who you are and what you value and what you believe in, then how can you possibly be the best person for other people in your world? So just have a little quick think about that for a moment. I'm just going to try and pull up the chat box, which I have lost. There we go. Great. So just before I go on to the next section, as Ross said, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat box. I'll just ask if you could preface a question with the letter Q and then a colon or a semicolon, so that it's really clear that it's a question and not a comment for when we come back at the end to curate the questions. So what I want to talk about as well, what are some of the challenges that we're facing today? So if you'd just like to maybe write into the chat box, what are some of the challenges in life right now? Whether they're personal challenges, whether they're work challenges. I'm really curious to see what's top of your mind in terms of things that might be giving you grief or, you know, causing a bit of anxiety, causing some overwhelm. So just type into the chat box. Okay, no access to sport. Yeah, my husband, I'm so grateful. He's a golfer and golf clubs have still been open in Queensland, and that has saved his sanity and gone a good way to saving our relationship at times. So other people have said staying healthy, too many Zooms, the Aldi chocolate aisle. Oh, I hear you. Lack of social connections. Oh, trying to find a new job. Claire, I really feel you with that. Looking for work, looking for clients, running a small business, the uncertainty, feeling guilty about taking personal time in between work and family and education. Yeah, that's a big one. Job insecurity, trying to gauge what post-COVID is going to be. There's some interesting comments here. Feeling guilty about charging clients. Can I just say, don't feel guilty? Please don't feel guilty. We all need to make a living and we're not charities. Managing the influences on my teenage daughter and social media in particular. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. Another vote for the Aldi chocolate. Oh, the Aldi's within walking distance of my house. That can be dangerous. And so is First Choice Liquor, whoever's just put Dan Murphy's. So there's some really interesting comments that are coming up here. And I don't know about you, but I think the biggest challenge in my world right now and in most businesses in general is COVID. It's coronavirus. What is it that 6 months ago, our world was nothing like it is now. I just think about all the things that have changed in my world. I've cancelled heaps and heaps of work trips. I've cancelled holidays. I've cancelled plans. We had to cancel, a funeral thing for my father-in-law because of COVID. And there's so many things that have just changed, both in our personal lives and in our work lives. I'm sure there's an enormous portion of you who, like me, are working from home. Some of us have always worked from home or worked from home for a long time, but for some of us it's new. And for some of us who have, teams of people that we're managing, the struggle and the challenge of having to go from managing people where you see each other most days to not seeing each other because you're through a screen all the time is such a massive challenge. And with this challenge comes increases in stress and anxiety and overwhelm as we try to navigate what does coronavirus look like and what does it work? How does it work in terms of how we do our jobs and how we live our lives? And what does it mean in terms of how it's changing as well? As some states become more free, in Queensland, we're fairly free at the moment. We can go to most places. We don't have too many coronavirus cases compared to Victoria, where you're in complete lockdown again. And, my heart goes out to those of you who are in Melbourne and who've gone back into lockdown. But I suspect you won't be the only ones doing this for the second time. So, how do we deal with this in amongst everything else that we've got going on in our world? And, some of the other changes, even before coronavirus came across our radar, was increased pressure at work, expectations that we do more with less, that budgets get cut, that the challenges of working with 5 generations in some workforces and having a marketplace with 6 generations. What do you communicate to get your message across to people who are 10 or 20 or 30 compared with people who are 60 and 70 and 80 and who have different expectations? Increased pressures as well in terms of societal pressures, things like Black Lives Matter, things like everyday sexism. How do we make sure that we are working in the right way and not alienating people either deliberately or accidentally with the language that we choose and the messages that we send out and the channels that we're using. And while we, as the communicators, we might be confident, how do we make sure that the people we're helping craft messages for and with aren't saying the wrong things? Like, how many times have you looked at one of your colleagues or your boss or a client and looked at their social media content or something they've said to the media and just gone, oh my God, what were you thinking when you said that? I'll never forget, years and years ago, one of my clients rang me and he said, you need to call the Australian newspaper. I'm like, why? And he said, they misquoted me and I'd like them to print a retraction. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And he told me about this interview that he had with somebody. And I said, well, what did you say? And he said, I said what they printed in the paper. And I said, but I can't get them to retract that if you said it. And he said, but I told them it was off the cuff. And I said, when exactly in this conversation did you say that? And he said, after I'd said it. And I'm like, dude, you've got no hope. And you've been dealing with the media for 25 years in your career and you should have known better. So, you know, the pressure that I felt that day was huge, probably a little bit on par with the pressure he felt, but he was a bit of an idiot. So, you know, but how do we deal with those things as well? And the anxiety and the stress and the overwhelm that can come from all of that. And then the third thing is increased loneliness. This, you know, loneliness has been becoming an epidemic even before coronavirus came about. 1 in 2 Australians report being lonely at least once a week. And loneliness isn't just something that happens when we're at home. Loneliness in the workplace is a huge, huge issue, with something like 56 or 60% of CEOs saying that they feel lonely at work. And increasingly numbers of staff at work are lonely. You know, have a think about how you feel at work. Do you feel that you've got a friend at work, or do you feel that you're just on your own to make decisions? There's a fantastic book that's just come out, which I'll just try and hold up, called Together. It's by Dr. Vivek Murthy. And Dr. Murthy was the 19th Surgeon General of the United States from 2014 to 2017 or 18. And one of the things that he discovered when he was doing his listening tour around the US just after he was appointed Surgeon General was that people were absolutely saying that the biggest health problems and the challenges they were facing were things like obesity and mental health and opioid addiction. But he said this underlying current that everybody was talking about but not really talking about was loneliness. And he said he was really shocked by the impact that loneliness is having on people's lives, both at home and at work. So have a think about, what is it that you can do, or what is it that you can do to help mitigate some of this as well? Because we know that when we're lonely, we get more stressed, we have greater levels of anxiety, and we're far more likely to become depressed. And anxiety and depression are the leading cause of long-term sickness, absence from work, as well as being a massive cause of presenteeism in the workplace. So all of these things have massive impacts on our productivity at work and the profit that our organisations generate. So we really need to be talking about these in the workplace. And then, of course, number 4 is one of my favourites, a growing reliance, and many would say an over-reliance on screens. The average person owns 3.6 screens in their home. And I don't know about you, but I'm currently looking at 3 screens as I talk to you. I've got the monitor, my laptop, my phone. Behind me is my iMac. And then in other rooms in my house, there's a couple of TVs, there's my husband's computer, there's a couple of iPads. Even our Thermomix has a screen. So, you know, screens are just huge. So do a little count up in your head. How many screens do you have in your house? We've got 11 in our house with 2 people. And when my stepson comes, there's usually 3 more. So someone once said to me they had 22 screens in their house with 3 people. So that just blew my mind. So a few of you have 7, 5, 12. Yeah. So just think about, no wonder we've got this over-reliance on screens. And the screen that we've got the biggest reliance on is the little small one that fits in our pocket, or that fits in our handbag, or that goes everywhere with us. And when we can't find it, I have a moment of panic. I don't know about you, but, you know, not knowing where your phone is something that can cause quite a bit of anxiety, which has a name. It's nomophobia. So nomophobia is the fear of not knowing where your phone is. How crazy is that? Research out of the UK showed that 1 in 8 of us are addicted to our phones. And it's like we've all got a life-threatening disease and carry an EpiPen. So our phone is like this EpiPen that we need to make sure that we don't die of some fatal thing, which is just bizarre to me. And, I remember thinking, I got my first smartphone back in 1996. It was my first job in an office, and I was so excited and I was so proud. And with my next phone, when I could send a text message on it, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And then about, 5-6 years later, I got my first BlackBerry. And again, my world just changed. And I thought, what an amazing life that we have and world that we live in, with technology that means I can take work home and leave work early, but still do a bit of work. And who else remembers, this is back in the 90s as well, I'm absolutely dating myself here, but who else remembers the home internet connection with that dial-up sound and razzing in to send all your emails once a day at the end of the day when you had an occasional work from home day? I think sometimes, what if COVID happened in the late 90s? How would our world be? How would we work? How would we do our jobs? Technology is amazing in that it allows us to pretty much, not have life as normal, but it's a lot less interrupted than it could otherwise be. It's not only our phones and the addiction to our phones, though. We're also addicted to Netflix. And it shouldn't be a surprise to any of you when you know that Reed Hastings, who's the CEO of Netflix, came out 2 years ago and said, our biggest competitor is sleep. Just think about that for a sec. The biggest competitor of Netflix, it's not Amazon Prime or Hulu or Stan or Disney Plus, it's sleep. Now, I don't know about you, but there's been so many times when I've been watching something on Netflix and it's popped up and said, are you sure you want to watch one more episode? And the reason it asks that is because it knows that people fall asleep while watching. So just have a little think. Now, I want to do a little quiz to see how addicted are you to your technology and your phone. So grab a pen or a piece of paper or use your phone to keep score. 1 point for each. So 1 point if you have a mild panic if you can't find your phone. 1 point if you scroll through your phone on public transport. Think back 6 months to the last time you might have caught the train or the bus. Or if you're a passenger in the car. Spent 3 hours as a passenger in the car on Monday, and I think I spent 2 hours and probably 45 minutes of that scrolling through my phone. If you use your phone as an alarm clock, that's another point. If you check your phone within 15 minutes of waking up, that's another point. The last 15 minutes before you go to sleep. If you check it while you're doing leisure activities, like, at the movies or reading a book or some other leisure activity, doing a jigsaw puzzle. Physical activities. I used to swim, and there were a few times I'd get a bit bored swimming laps, and so I'd get out of the pool and I'd check my phone and I'd go back and do another half a dozen laps. That's pretty bad, I know. But how often do you, check your phone while you're playing a sport? 10 seconds passes and you don't realise that you've just checked your phone because you've forgotten. And so you check it again. That's another point. You've got notifications from 5 or more apps turned onto your phone. That might be Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, email, calendar appointments, WhatsApp, text messages, Facebook Messenger. Oh, there's so many apps. Meditation apps. I find that quite ironic when my meditation app pops up to remind me of something. When you check it, do you check it when you're eating? That's another point. time disappears, and you're, for example, you sit on the couch and you think, I'm just going to have a look at Instagram for a minute, and before you know it, it's 20 minutes. Time goes. Who texts and drives? Seriously, that should be 20 points right there. Hopefully nobody. Phantom phone vibration. How often have you thought, oh my God, my phone's vibrated, it's in my pocket, it's wherever, and it hasn't? You check it in the middle of the night. When a notification goes off, when you're on the toilet. Who remembers the census social media reports from a few years ago? One of their reports said that 18% of men check their phone on the toilet and 11% of women do. Not too sure how those numbers aren't reversed when you think about, but on the loo. In meetings, who checks in meetings? And you can add Zoom to this now, because who hasn't done the sneaky phone check while on a Zoom meeting? Or if you've been on the phone and you've walked into something. I know I have, and it was highly embarrassing. So I'm just going to show a little poll, add up what your numbers are, and I'll just get you to, hopefully the poll's popped up. Oops, it won't have yet because I haven't launched it. Hopefully the poll has popped up, and just check off which one, how many points did you score? 0 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 to 15, or 16 or more. And I'll just give you a few seconds. A few comments. Number of phones dropped in the toilet is amazing. Yeah, I've come close to dropping mine in a few times. Okay, so we've got nobody with 0 to 5. I would not have expected any 0 to 5s with this group of communicators. I've had maybe 3 in the past, and I've done this quiz with thousands of people. 2 people have had 16 or more. The majority of you have had 6 to 11 points. Yeah, that's pretty standard, and that's pretty good. So that means that you've pretty much got your phone under control, but you can definitely be a little bit, more aware of how you use it. So I'll just give another couple of seconds for anyone to answer the poll, and then I'll end it. All right. I'm a responsible adult, trademark. Yes, I love that. Okay, thank you. And I'll just pop the results up for you all to see them. Okay. And moving along. I don't know what's happened there. Oh, you have to close it. Right, great. Okay, so then the other challenge we have now is we have a disengaged workforce. So we'll come back to some solutions to disconnect in a few minutes. But I just want to quickly talk about when you have a disengaged workforce, that leads to things like when you have a disengaged workforce, you don't tend to have as much trust as you could otherwise have. And the way we trust is changing. The Edelman Trust Barometer tells us that the most trusted person we have in the workplace is our direct supervisor. And when we have trust at work, we have greater engagement, we have greater productivity, we have greater profit, and we have less presenteeism. So we'll chat in a bit about how we can increase our trust. And we'll also talk about what is it that we need to do in the workplace. My favourite quote from Doug Conant is, to win the marketplace, you must first win the workplace. And when you win the workplace, which basically means you have a more engaged workforce, you can read this on the screen, you've got less absenteeism, fewer accidents if you're in manufacturing or in production, fewer defects, because more of them are eliminated, and increased productivity. And this number that I love the most is an engaged workforce can give you 21% more productivity. And who does not want more productivity and more profit in the workplace, especially when you're the boss? So what do we do? How do we become more connected? And how do we become, what do we need to do to become more connected as communicators and as leaders? The first thing we need to do is we need to put our own health first, because if you're not healthy, if you don't feel well, there is absolutely no way you're going to be able to bring your best person to life in general. And by putting your health first, it means making sure you get enough sleep, you eat the right foods, you drink enough water, you get enough rest during the day, you move and you exercise enough. And one of the things that I can't emphasize highly enough is that you have a regular visit to the doctor for a checkup. Women go to the doctor on average of once a year. Men go far less frequently than that. And most men don't tend to go to the doctor until they've got something really serious wrong with them, that's manifesting either through significant pain or some other symptom that they can't ignore any longer. So think about what is it you need to do to put your health first. And then along with that is know what stress looks like. Stress is the #1 killer in Australia. It leads to high blood pressure, which can lead to stroke, heart attack, other cardiovascular diseases. It can also lead to a whole bunch of different cancers. Stress can lead to Parkinson's. It can lead to so many different neurological diseases as well. So know what the symptoms of stress are both in yourself and in the people in your workplace and in your family. So some of the symptoms of stress are things like you don't sleep very well at night, or you wake up with a lot of things churning through your mind. You might lose your appetite. You might eat a lot more of different things like, cake during COVID. You might drink a lot more coffee. You might drink a lot more alcohol. You might have that churning feeling in your gut all the time. There's so many different symptoms of stress. So, I can give you some more information if you'd like, but you really need to know what that looks like for you. When I was in my late 20s, I had the most stressful job I've ever had, and my blood pressure was through the roof. I had chest pains all the time. I honestly thought I was going to have a heart attack, and I was 29. And I went to the doctor and had a series of tests, and he said to me, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're probably going to have a stroke before you turn 30. And that was 3 months later. So obviously 20 years later, I made some changes that he approved of. The biggest one was that I quit my job and I moved to Brisbane from Sydney. That was extreme, but it was what I needed to do because I'd let the stress build up too much. So all the symptoms that you recognize in stress for yourself, you need to think about are these any of the symptoms that my staff are showing as well, or my colleagues or my family members. And another big indicator of work stress is people who constantly miss deadlines and who constantly take days off work, usually in single day lots. That's a really sure sign that something's not quite right with them. So, work out how you can kindly ask what the matter is and provide some support. So the third thing that we need to be doing is we need to get control of our screen time, because there's so much research that also shows the more time we spend staring at a screen, the more stressed and anxious we become. So one of the things when it comes to screen time is you can't manage what you don't measure. And so take a photo of this screen and work out how to check the settings on your phone to measure your screen time. This is for an iPhone, and you'll see this was done pre-COVID when my daily screen time was 1:56. And you can see from the slides here that it also shows where is it on your phone that you're spending that time. So you can see that a lot of mine was on social networking, some on productivity, some on creativity. And it also shows you, if you scroll through, the apps that you use the most and what you use when you first pick up your phone. So for me, it was my camera, and it still often is. And yes, Android has an option of this as well. I'm just not sure where you find it on an Android, but I can send you something after. I would just like to admit as well that it took me a very, very long time to get my screen time down to 1:56. So I was comfortable in sharing a photo of this, because the first time I looked at my screen time, it was about 5.5 hours, and it was 5.5 hours every day for a very, very, very long time, until I put some very concerted processes in place to reduce my screen time. So don't think that, oh my God, she's amazing, it's so low, because I struggled and worked, and it took me about 6 months to get it to consistently below 2 hours a day. And of course, as soon as coronavirus hit, my screen time went skyrocketing up to between 7 and 8 hours a day for many, many, many weeks. And I'm only now getting it back below 4 hours a day. And the way I did that is I removed an app. So if you just look at this screen again, it tells you which apps you use the most. The app that I removed was Facebook, because that was the app that I was using the most. So think about, what do you use the most that's not actually that helpful and relevant, and take one of those apps off. So I've got friends who've removed email from their phone, particularly they remove it on weekends so that they don't get tempted to check their work email on weekends. Other people I know have removed games like Candy Crush. Other people I know have removed Instagram. Think about which one it is that you don't need, or multiple apps that you don't need, and just get rid of them off your phone. The other little trick is turn your phone into grayscale. And I challenge you to put your phone into grayscale for 24 hours and see how you feel at the end of that. Because Instagram in grayscale is very unappealing to spend hours scrolling through. Trust me on that. I've learned that one as well. So have a think about if you can try this, because while it might not, you might not need to then remove an app, but you might just find that it automatically helps you use them less. And then the third thing is turn off notifications. So many people have notifications switched on for every single app, and you do not need that. So think about what are the apps that you have on your phone and your computer and your iPad and your laptop and all of your other devices that pop up with notifications. Which ones do you really genuinely need and which ones do you not? So turning off every notification on mine made such a big difference. And the only notifications I have now on my phone are my calendar, messages, and Facebook messages, normal text messages, and WhatsApp. And I don't tend to use any of those a lot, and so there's not a whole lot of apps that turn up. Although having said that, I do have a notification for the Calm app that keeps coming up at 10 o'clock every morning that says, how do you feel today? And this morning I saw it and thought, stressed, stop it. So have a think about how many of those apps do you genuinely need? And in particular, I found turning off notifications for Twitter and email were the biggest game changer for me in terms of how I felt, in terms of anxiety. So think about how can you turn some of these off. Someone's also just asked about a smartwatch, and I don't wear a watch and haven't since I was about, 23 or 24 years old. And as much as I love the idea of a smartwatch, I just wonder how much does that impact on your life in a way that is going to be unhelpful to managing your health and your stress levels, particularly if all the notifications are on your watch every time somebody wants you. The other thing with notifications and with distractions is every time you stop to look at a notification or to stop from doing one task, such as writing something, to doing another task, such as checking an email or checking social media, it takes your brain 11 minutes to get back into the productivity flow. And that's a big gap, particularly when you consider the number of times you're distracted over the course of a day by something on your phone or another device. And then think as well, how can you create a tech policy? Can you create a tech policy for home and a tech policy for work? And some of the things that this might include in it are things like no phones in meetings, email-free Friday. If you use Outlook, default it to the calendar and not the email. Can you have a phone or a no phone zone in your home? So in our home, we have a pretty strict no phones at the table rule. No phones when we're eating together, unless there's a conversation that we need to have around something in an email or something on a phone. So think about what is it that you can do to put your phone down and to build stronger relationships with the people in your home and in your workplace. For those of you who have kids and complain about how often your kids are on your phone, take a good hard look at how long you spend on your phone first before you criticize them. Because if they only see you on your phone, then how are they going to believe you when you say to them, put your phone down, when that's what you're spending heaps of time doing? So you can't be what you can't see. So you need to be leading by example, particularly the no phones in meetings, if that's a problem in your workplace, where people take their phone and just, get distracted by it. So think about some of these things that you could do. And then think about as well, what's important to you? What are the important things in your world? What are the important things in your home world, in your personal world, and in your work world? And then maybe make one or two of those a priority that you work on. I know for me, last year, my health was my biggest priority. I was going through perimenopause and turning 50 and thinking I'd like to have another 30 or 40 years of life and a high quality of life. So I really need to think about focusing on my health. And the one thing that was letting me down was sleep. I wasn't going to bed at the right time. I wasn't sleeping well. I was drinking a lot of alcohol, a lot of coffee. And so I thought, okay, let's just focus on my sleep. And, it's a long, hard slog when you make changes like that, but it's worth it because, it's what's important to me. So have a think about what's important in your world and how can you prioritize that. And then another great way of, becoming more connected with yourself and with others is work out what gives you joy and find the joy in the world. This photo is from my most favourite place in the world, a little place called Kilcare on the New South Wales Central Coast. And I have not been there in far too long, thanks to border closures and coronavirus, but that gives me joy. And looking at photos of the surf and beach gives me joy. So think about what is it that gives you joy in the world. Is it spending time with people you love? Is it listening to music? Is it reading a book? Is it playing sport? Is it getting fresh air? Is it getting into nature? Is it laughter? We don't laugh enough. So prioritize something every day that gives you joy. And I'm laughing at some of the comments, particularly Michaela, who said chocolate, coffee, cheese, and exercise. Well, the first three give me joy. Not less sure about exercise. I'm still a bit sore from a PT session I had this morning over FaceTime. So there are a lot of the things that you can do to connect with yourself. And then one of the things we need to think about too is how do you connect with the people in your workplace? So how do you make sure that your communication messages are getting across? And one of the main things that we need to know or be aware of is making sure your people know your purpose. So as we are changing with coronavirus, as we're coming out of COVID in some places, as we're going back into lockdown in others, what do your staff need? What do your colleagues need? And then what do your customers need in terms of messages, in terms of support from you? Do they know what your goals are at the moment? Do they know what the purpose of your organization is, both so that they can do their job to help you achieve it? And so as customers, they can become more aware of what you stand for and what your values are as we go through this. I'm just getting a bit of a wrap up, so I'm speaking fast now. Thanks. Thanks, Ross. And the way that we get to understand what our staff want and what our customers want is by listening. Communication is about listening. We need to learn how to better listen, how to ask questions, and how to observe. And all of those things can be really, really hard when we're doing it through a screen and through Zoom, particularly the observation part, which means we need to be even better at listening and asking questions. And one of the questions that I think is so important to ask is, what do you need from me right now? What is it I can do for you right now? How can I help you right now? And what do you need from me? And so for those of you who have direct reports or staff reporting to you or working with clients, the most valuable question that I've asked all of the people I work with and all of my clients are, what do you need from me right now? And if the answer is nothing, then, and frequently it is because people don't like to admit they need things, then I always say, I'm here for you. And I just check in on a regular basis. So checking in, asking questions, being there for people, listening to their answers. And then when we're speaking and communicating, we need to be communicating with clarity. Our messages need to be really clear about what we want people to do, what we want people to say, and ideally what we want people to think about so that they can understand what they need to be doing. We've all seen messages during COVID that have been very ambiguous. We don't want to be an ambiguous person, especially as a communicator. We want to be clear in our messaging. We also need to be showing compassion because there is so much anxiety and fear as we come out of lockdown or as we go back into it. And so the more you can demonstrate compassion and the more you can ask questions to make sure that people are feeling okay, or providing them with some support if they're not, then the better off you will be as a communicator in your organisation. And then the third thing is, how do we communicate with consistency? I asked one of my clients recently, he's the CEO of a bank, and I said to him, how are your staff going? He said, how are they feeling about coming back into the workplace? And he said, oh, well, we told them ages ago that, blah, blah, blah. And I said, have you repeated that message? And he said, no, I've told them once. So we need to be thinking about how do we communicate frequently with regularity, with a consistency of message across all of the different platforms that we use. And while I know that as communicators, I would expect that all of you already communicate with clarity, compassion, and consistency. When we ourselves are feeling anxious and overwhelmed and stressed, sometimes those things just fall by the wayside. So we're about to open up to questions, and I know there's been a few questions that have popped into the chat box, so thank you. And what was I going to say? Yes, so so yeah, please do think of some questions if you have any. But as we go forward, just think about what is it that you need to do to look after yourself? What is it you need to do so you can connect first with yourself before you connect with your staff and your work and your colleagues at work, and then your clients and your customers? Because if you don't look after yourself first, and if you don't think about what is it that's going to make you less stressed, overwhelmed, and more relaxed, then you're not going to be able to do the best job you can for the people who are going to need you the most. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mel. We do have some questions. I've been taking a note of some of them in chronological order. Mark asked, what is presentism?
Presenteeism.
Presenteeism.
Presenteeism is when you physically turn up at work, but you're not mentally there. It's kind of like when you're just dialing it in, which is an expression I hate, but that's probably the best answer.
Joanna Nelson asked, does wearing a smartwatch make this even worse? Thinking about the impact of watch notifications versus a phone. That's a really good question. It's something I've noticed.
I did allude to that in my responses, that I think it does. But obviously people wear smartwatches for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe just think about, can you turn it off sometimes, or do you need to wear it all the time if you find that it's causing an increased level of anxiety with all of the notifications going off on it?
I'd be interested, if you wear a smartwatch, leave a comment. I'm interested to know how many communicators actually use those smartwatches and whether they think they're useful. I actually don't use mine anymore. It's sitting on charging, and I only use it when I'm running to keep a tab of that. Although I noticed in the past couple of days, I think it's a bit of a hint to me. It keeps randomly saying starting run. it's starting to drop hints, I think. But anyway, we had another question. I think it was Luke who asked, what about if you get your news from Facebook and Twitter, which are apps on your phone? I think that would related to turning off the notifications.
I think if that's the only place you get news, then you need to be aware that it will be very guided by the people you're following and connected with, and so you might not get a balanced form of the news.
Yeah, which I think was which one of our attendees pretty much said as well. I think that was Tim. That's great. If there are any other questions, please leave them now. I think it looks like Matt is still hard at work there. We might get how are you going, Matt?
Pretty good. I'm nearly finished. I'm just kind of capturing a couple of the last few points, but I'm happy to share in a sec.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really keen to see what you've done. For those that haven't seen Matt, he produces some amazing content, colourful content at conferences, has been a guest at many of the IABC Victoria sessions as well.
I'm going to add one more thing with a smartphone. I'm assuming that all of them have this feature, but you can set time limits for different apps. So I've set a time limit for a cumulative use each day of LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So I only allow myself 1 hour a day for each of those 3 channels. And that's cumulative across all of them. So what it does at the end of the hour is it gives me a 5-minute warning. And then at the end of the hour, I can choose to either continue using the app and ignore the warning for the day or for a limited amount of time, or I can, but what I find is really interesting is what time of the day is it that I get that notification. So yesterday, the notification of 5 minutes to go came up at about 7:30 last night, just as I was sitting on the couch to watch MasterChef. So clearly I ignored that. But this morning it was 8 a.m. So I find that when it's early in the morning, I think, oh God, okay, I've really got some bad habits going already this morning. So that's a really useful app as well. Just if you're wanting to get your screen time down and you know that there's particular apps where you spend an enormous amount of time, potentially unnecessarily. Obviously, as communicators, we need to often use social media apps as a part of our job. And so you need to factor that in, but using it for your job is quite different from the random mindless scrolling that can be very easy to do and which has been built in to the technology designed to be addictive.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there's a lot of recognition that we are, those social media platforms are using us. They're selling us as customers to advertise. The other point I wanted to...
I'm going to grab another book to show you.
Yep, great. The other thing that I've noticed with my phone, which I am really bad at doing, but is turning it off or putting it down well ahead of going to sleep, because I find, particularly if you get an email that it's a bit, you need to think about, or you play games, I find I lay there and my mind is whirling. I mean, that's another tip that you suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at a question that's come up that says, what if you're being told you aren't available enough for others, but your own days are already massive for clients and being available for your team means doing it when you'd normally be at the gym or with family? I think that it's, and without knowing whether you work for yourself or somebody else, I think it's really critical that we learn to set boundaries for ourselves and we learn to communicate what those boundaries might be. So, for example, if you're at work and you're paid to do essentially a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 6 job, then if your job requires hours outside of the standard, then you need to have a conversation with your boss around what does it look like. When you work for yourself, it can be a lot more difficult sometimes to set those boundaries, particularly when you need to bring business in and you don't know what that's going to look like in the future. But also, we've had this conversation in our household as well. And my husband said to me a few years ago, I feel like I have no time for myself in between work and my son and you and everything else. And so we looked at our family, week together and worked out where is some time that he can do what he wants to do without anybody else putting pressure onto him. When you've got small children, it's far more difficult. But I think as for women in particular, we're so good at saying yes to everybody else that we forget to say yes to ourselves. And we really need to make a point of letting people know that saying yes to look after yourself is not a selfish act. It's actually a really important act of self-care and often self-preservation. So good luck with that. But think about where can you set some boundaries, and maybe also something else I find helps is setting some rituals. So do you have a morning ritual or an evening ritual or a work ritual or a bedtime ritual? And when you've got some rituals, it takes decision-making away. So, for example, if you've got a morning routine where you get up, you go for a walk, you might do some other exercise, you might meditate, you might have a cup of tea, then breakfast, then clean your teeth, then get dressed, then get the kids ready for school, or, whatever it is. Doing it in rote means that you, that's awesome, means that you don't need to think about what you're going to do next because you've got that routine.
Fantastic. That's great, Mel. Look, you as always have had given us a great oversight of this issue, and I think you've given us some really practical tips. I know personally I'm going to take some of those. I'll be looking at notifications. I'll be looking at my screen time. If I can get it down to your 2 hours, I'm going to be very proud of myself. So thank you for your time.
Maybe
Mel?
don't try to go from 6 hours to 2 hours in a week. Maybe just try and, cut 15 minutes a week off and see how you go there.
If I can get it out of the 20 hours a day, I'm going to be really happy, just quietly between you and me, with the start of trimester going at the moment. But Matt, we can see your work here. Like, you know, given that you've done that during this is absolutely amazing. Do you want to explain some of this to us?
Sure. So, as I'm sure everyone on the call would agree, it was just like an onslaught of amazing, useful, practical tips for how to manage this issue better. And I learned a lot, even though sometimes a lot of the stuff it's nice to be reminded. So, below Mel's little portrait that I've done, I tried to capture that idea of the Maya Angelou quote that humans crave connection, but we also need to be connected to ourselves. And so that graphic of reaching out and having the social media there, but also coming back into ourselves was what jumped out for me. Those little clouds with the dotted lines popping out of them, that's just my technique for kind of when Mel's talking about lists of things, or if she's talking about a theme and there's a few related elements hanging off it, I'll stick the theme in the center of the cloud, and then hang those different things that I hear off of each of those clouds. So that knowing the symptoms of stress and the tips for reducing screen time. When she said we had too many screens in our lives, I was kind of sketching, so I couldn't participate in the point system, but I know that I was probably up in the upper echelons of those points, and that's definitely not as many screens as I have in my house that I've drawn there. But that was what jumped out at me. I'm sitting here with 3 screens in front of me and 2 behind me in the home office. But then towards the end, a lot of the tips started to kind of bleed into each other because it's all overlapping. And so that the comments about loneliness and looking after yourself so you can look after your team, and finishing with those 3 key big messages of consistency, compassion, and clarity, and prioritizing what gives you joy was what I heard. And I meant to draw a couple of speech bubbles for. I'm probably, being the perfectionist that I am, I'll probably add a couple of little bits of decorative bits and pieces, but it's mostly done. And great content, Mel, and thanks so much for giving us this information so that I can lay it out in this way.
Well, thanks so much, Matt. That's amazing. Don't forget to sign it.
Will do, yep.
And, someone's just asked if we can share it on social. I'm certainly happy for it to be.
Yeah, of course. I'll add a few more little bits and pieces just to finish it off, because, like I said, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist sometimes, and IABC will definitely tweet that out and Facebook and the like, and so feel free to share and send it out yourself.
That's amazing. Thanks.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Before everyone goes, I might just share my screen again quickly if I can, which
I can. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I have a white paper on strategic communication for leaders. If anybody would like a copy of that, please just. Why isn't that working? Hang on. There we go. Just either send me a text or send me an email, and I'd be really happy to share that. And my contact details are on that screen as well. I think I put into the chat box, I'm always really happy to talk about how we can better connect with ourselves and with others. So if you have any questions, just reach out, or either through email or through social media. Thanks. Okay.
It'll definitely be, we'll definitely put that on the website. Just to let everyone know that we'll be sending details out about our August seminar soon. And a reminder of the IABC Asia Pacific midweek comms sessions that we hold each Wednesday at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So that's happening tonight. It's a really good opportunity for you to drop in, talk about any issues you're having at work, particularly related to quarantine, social isolation issues, or generally we talk about anything. So I highly commend those to you. Thank you to all of the attendees as well. And we'll hope to see you next time.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.